My name is Mark, and I've spent the last 30 years carrying the world's most dangerous secret locked inside a tiny, protected digital file. You're looking at the only copy. It's not a photograph. It's not a footprint cast. It's sound. And this sound, this single minute of recorded audio, proves that everything we believe about the wilderness, about human history, and about evolution itself, is a lie. I am an outlaw now. I know there are men, government scientists, deep-pocketed collectors, even agents, who would gladly break down this door and erase me just to possess this file. That's why I have to get this story out, here and now. The evidence I carry isn't just proof that the Sasquatch exists, it proves that they think. And worst of all, it proves that they communicate. For 3 decades, I was a sound engineer, specializing in recording ambient noise in the remote parts of the Appalachian wilderness. I went into the woods looking for silence and natural rhythms, the sound of wind through the hemlock, the precise call of a specific owl, the subtle rush of the mountain creeks. I was a man obsessed with audio purity. I wasn't hunting monsters. I was archiving the soul of the forest. But one crisp autumn morning, my life's work was annihilated by 5 precise, horrifying seconds of recording. I captured a deep, resonant, distinctly non-human voice. It wasn't a roar, a grunt, or a howl. It was speech, structured, guttural, but undeniably English. The moment I heard that tape, the moment I processed the words forming a sentence, I stopped being a scientist and became a panicked custodian of a forbidden truth. I realized that this creature, this giant of myth, was capable of expressing complex thought. He wasn't just hiding from us. He was listening to us, absorbing our language, and calculating. The truth I uncovered is not the existence of a monster, but the existence of a dark, silent intelligence that lives parallel to us. I kept the secret because I knew the moment I revealed it, the hunting parties wouldn't come with cages. They would come with guns. I protected the tape because I knew the moment they found him, they would silence him forever. But the silence is broken now. I'm sharing this file today because he knows I have it. I know he knows because the final seconds of this recording aren't words. They are the sudden chilling sound of my camera shutter click, followed by a deafening cold silence, and the heavy, terrifying sound of a creature turning its head directly toward the lens. I escaped that day, but I never truly left the woods. I've been running ever since. It was October of 1994. I wasn't a ghost hunter, and I certainly wasn't a cryptozoologist. I was a field acoustician. My job, my obsession really, was capturing the vanishing soundscapes of North America. I was under contract with a university archive to record pure, unadulterated nature sounds before human noise pollution made true silence extinct. I wasn't looking for monsters, I was looking for the absence of machines. That specific Tuesday, I had hiked 6 miles deep into a restricted area of the Nantahala National Forest in North Carolina. It was a place known locally as the Throat, a deep acoustic bowl surrounded by granite cliffs that created a natural amphitheater. It was perfect. The geography shielded the valley from the distant hum of highways and air traffic. I arrived before dawn, setting up my equipment with the reverence of a priest preparing an altar. My gear was the best money could buy at the time. A Nagra IVS reel-to-reel recorder, analog, heavy, and incredibly precise, paired with a high-sensitivity parabolic microphone and a set of Sennheiser open-back headphones. I knew these woods. I knew the rhythm of the dawn chorus, the wood thrush first, then the warblers, then the wind picking up in the canopy. It was a predictable symphony. I settled into my hide, a small camouflage blind I'd set up near a dense rhododendron thicket, and hit record. For the first 2 hours, it was standard. The tape spooled, capturing the crisp rustle of dry leaves and the distant trickle of a creek. I watched the VU meters on my recorder bounce rhythmically with the bird calls. I was in a meditative state, listening to the world through amplified ears. The forest was loud, vibrant, and alive. Then, at exactly 8:42 a.m., the world broke. It didn't start with a sound. It started with silence. The Oz effect, some call it. In a matter of seconds, the dawn chorus simply cut out. The wood thrush stopped mid-song. The squirrels froze. Even the wind seemed to die down, as if the air itself had been sucked out of the valley. The VU meters on my recorder dropped to near zero. The noise floor, the background hiss of the world, vanished. My headphones went dead silent, save for the thump of my own heartbeat, which sounded like a drum in the amplified isolation. I frowned, checking my cables. I thought a battery had died or a wire had shorted. I turned the gain knob up, pushing the sensitivity of the microphone to its maximum limit, trying to find the sound of the forest again. That's when I picked it up. It wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from the dense brush to my left, maybe 40 yards away, down in a ravine obscured by fog. It registered on the meter first. A low, rhythmic spike in the lower frequencies, below 20 hertz. Infrasound, the kind of bass that you feel in your sternum before you hear it with your ears. It made me nauseous. A primal, inexplicable dread washed over me, a biological alarm bell ringing in my lizard brain saying, "Run." But I didn't run. I was a technician. I wanted to know what was causing the interference. I adjusted the parabolic dish, aiming it like a weapon toward the source of the low frequency. Through the headphones, the sound clarified. It wasn't the mechanical hum of a generator. It was organic. It was wet. It was the sound of massive lungs pushing air through a throat the size of a drainpipe. It sounded like gravel grinding together. Deep, guttural clicks and pops, interspersed with heavy, heaving breaths. I thought, bear? No. Bears don't have that vocal range. Cougar? Too low. The sound was almost subaquatic, like a whale song transposed into mountain air. Then, the guttural grinding shifted. The chaotic noises began to organize. The rhythm changed from animalistic panting to a cadence, a structure, phonemes. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the headphones. I pressed them tighter to my ears, closing my eyes, trying to filter the sound through my brain's logic center. The voice was incredibly deep, vibrating with a resonance that sounded like it was coming from inside a cave. It was whispering, but a whisper at that volume sounded like a rock slide. And then, through the static and the low-end rumble, the syllables locked into place. Hurt. Leg. I froze. My brain rejected it instantly. I told myself it was pareidolia, the psychological phenomenon where the mind finds patterns in random noise, like seeing faces in clouds. I told myself it was the wind groaning through a hollow log. But then it came again, clearer, with a downward inflection of misery. Cold. Hurt. Stone. The clarity was terrifying. The accent was wrong. Thick, heavy, distorted, as if the speaker was struggling to manipulate a tongue that was too large for its mouth. But the words were unmistakable. It wasn't mimicking a parrot. The tone carried emotional weight. It sounded exhausted. It sounded old. I stared at the spinning reels of the Nagra recorder. The magnetic tape was capturing every second of it. I wasn't hallucinating. A biological entity, hidden 40 yards away in the Appalachian mist, was speaking English. It wasn't a man. No human vocal cords could produce that sub-bass frequency. And it wasn't an animal. No animal understands the concept of stone or cold in human syntax. I sat there paralyzed, watching the needles dance. I was the only human being on Earth witnessing the impossible. The creature was talking to itself, or perhaps to another one I couldn't see. It was a soliloquy of pain. I should have packed up. I should have fled. But the scientist in me, the man who worshipped sound, overtook the survivalist. This was the most important recording in history. I had to get closer. I had to get a cleaner signal. I reached for the gain knob again, and with trembling fingers I prepared to violate the safety of the distance between us. Rationality is a fragile shield. For 50 years I relied on logic. If I heard a growl, I backed away. If I saw a storm coming, I sought shelter. But staring at those bouncing needles on the Nagra recorder, listening to a voice that shouldn't exist recite words of human suffering, my rationality didn't just crack. It evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, burning compulsion. I wasn't scared anymore. I was infected. I needed more than a recording. I needed to know what was speaking. The voice continued, a low, rhythmic mantra of pain. Heavy. Trap. Dark. The words were spaced out by wet, rattling breaths. The creature wasn't just talking, it was narrating its own agony. My mind raced. Was it mimicking a hunter it had heard years ago? Or was it constructing thoughts? The implication of the latter was so earth-shattering that it physically pulled me from my seat. I looked at my hands. They were white-knuckled around the headphones. I had a choice. I could pack up my gear, crawl backwards out of the blind, hike back to the truck, and drive until I hit a city, pretending this never happened. That was the survival instinct. That was the choice of a sane man. But I looked at the gap in the rhododendrons, the dark tunnel of vegetation leading down toward the ravine. The source was static. It wasn't moving. It sounded hurt. The opportunity was singular. If I left, I would be the man who almost found the truth. I would be another crazy story in a bar. But if I went closer, if I could sync this impossible audio with a visual source, I wouldn't just be a witness. I would be the man who rewrote history. I reached into my pack and pulled out my secondary piece of kit, a heavy shoulder-mounted VHS camcorder. It was clunky, the battery was old, and the autofocus was loud, but it was all I had. I checked the tape. 20 minutes remaining. I made the decision that would ruin my life. I didn't pack up to leave. I packed up to hunt. I left the heavy Nagra recorder running in the blind, the shotgun mic pointed like a sentry toward the ravine to capture the ambient audio. I took the portable DAT recorder and the camera. I moved out of the blind not like a hiker but like a thief. I crawled on my stomach, dragging my body through the wet leaf litter, agonizing over every snap of a twig. The distance was 40 yards. It felt like 40 miles. As I got closer, the sensory details shifted. The air grew colder, damp with the mist clinging to the ravine floor. And then came the smell. It hit me like a physical wall. A dense, overwhelming stench of wet dog, sulfur, and something unmistakably metallic, like old copper pennies. It was the smell of an apex predator, but layered with the sweet, sickly scent of infection. I paused behind a massive fallen oak tree, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought the camera microphone would pick it up. The voice was louder now. I could hear the wet click of the tongue, the massive intake of air. Help. No. Help. It wasn't a mimicry. The inflection was interrogative. It was asking a question. Help? Or maybe it was pleading. I slowly, agonizingly, raised my head above the rotting bark of the fallen oak. The ravine opened up below me. It was a shadowy, rocky depression, shielded by a canopy of ancient hemlocks. And there, sitting with its back against a mossy boulder, partially obscured by shadows, was a shape that made no biological sense. It was enormous. Even sitting, its shoulders were twice the width of a man's. It was covered in dark, matted hair that blended perfectly with the shadows. It wasn't a bear. The anatomy was all wrong. The arms were too long, ending in massive dark hands that were currently clutching its own lower leg. It was rocking back and forth slightly, a human gesture of self-soothing. I brought the viewfinder of the camcorder to my eye. The black and white CRT display flickered. I focused. The image was grainy, but undeniable. I was looking at a Sasquatch, and it was looking at its own leg, speaking to itself in English. My finger hovered over the red REC button. I knew that the moment I pressed it, the mechanical whir of the tape heads engaging would make a sound. A tiny sound. A sound that shouldn't matter over the noise of the wind. But in the unnatural silence of that valley, it would be a gunshot. I didn't care. The greed for the truth was too strong. I took a deep breath, steadied the heavy camera on the log and pressed the button. Click. Whirr. Mark just made the most dangerous decision of his life. Would you press record? Hit the like button if you're terrified, and comment below what you think the creature will do next. The whir of the tape heads engaging sounded like a chainsaw in the quiet valley, but the creature didn't react. The pain radiating from its leg must have been a blinding white noise, drowning out the subtle mechanics of my theft. Through the flickering black and white viewfinder of the camcorder, I watched a nightmare come into focus. The grainy image couldn't capture the sheer density of the thing. It was a mountain of muscle and matted fur, slumped against the rock like a fallen king, but it was the face that broke me. Through the zoom lens, I saw features that were terrifyingly human. A broad, flat nose, deep-set eyes that were currently squeezed shut in agony, and lips, distinctly mobile, expressive lips that were moving in sync with the sounds I was hearing. The audio from the on-camera microphone was tinny compared to the Nagra, but the proximity made up for it. I was 40 yards away, peering into the private hell of a legend, and the legend was speaking. Iron, bites, deep. The voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding underwater, but the diction was precise. It wasn't mimicking the sounds of the forest. It was describing its reality. I zoomed in on its leg. Just above the ankle, hidden by the thick dark fur, I saw the glint of rusted metal, a bear trap. An old, illegal, jagged-tooth bear trap, chained to the root of a hemlock tree. The chain was pulled taut. The creature wasn't just resting, it was anchored. The creature let out a sigh that shuddered through its whole frame, and then it spoke again. This time it wasn't just words. It was a sentence. A complex, structured thought. Men. Leave. Iron. Why? Hate. My breath hitched in my throat. The camera shook in my hands. I had to brace it against the log to keep the shot steady. Why hate? It understood the concept of malice. It understood that the trap wasn't an accident of nature, but a deliberate creation of men. The cognitive dissonance hit me like a physical blow. My brain was trying to process two conflicting realities simultaneously. My visual cortex was screaming, animal, monster, apex predator, while my auditory cortex was whispering, person, victim, intelligence. The gap between those two realities was where my sanity began to leak out. I listened, entranced and horrified, as the creature began to mutter faster, the words tumbling out in a stream of consciousness. It sounded like an Appalachian dialect, not modern English, but something older, thicker, like the way the old-timers up in the hollers used to speak in the 1920s. Forest, mine, river, mine, brothers, gone, cold, take, me. It was mourning. It was aware of its own mortality. It knew it was going to die in this trap. The sadness in that voice was so profound, so deeply human, that I felt tears pricking my eyes. I wasn't filming a monster. I was filming a prisoner of war. I realized then the terrifying implication of what I was hearing. If they speak, they have a culture. If they have a culture, they pass down knowledge. They tell stories. And for generations, the stories they have been telling each other are about us. We are the monsters in their folklore. We are the men who leave iron and fire. I watched as the creature reached down with hands the size of catcher's mitts and pulled at the trap. The metal creaked but didn't give. The creature whimpered, a high, keen sound that contrasted horribly with its size. Pa. Told. Watch. Pa. Said. Hide. Pa. It had a father. It had a lineage. It remembered warnings given by a parent. This wasn't instinct. This was memory. I was holding the most important footage in the history of mankind, but I didn't feel like a discoverer. I felt like a voyeur. I felt like I was recording the deathbed confession of a sentient being that my species had tormented. The challenge wasn't just staying hidden anymore. The challenge was keeping my own worldview from shattering completely. I looked at the creature, trapped and alone, speaking to the memory of its father, and I realized I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I was afraid for it. And that empathy, that dangerous, misplaced human empathy, made me careless. I shifted my weight. I wanted to get a better angle of the trap, to see if I could document the mechanism. My boot slid on the wet moss behind the log. A small branch no thicker than a pencil snapped under my heel. Crack. In the amphitheater of the valley, that snap was a gunshot. The murmuring stopped instantly. The heavy, rhythmic breathing cut off. In the viewfinder, I saw the creature's head snap up. The eyes, previously shut in pain, flew open. They weren't animalized, they were wide, white-rimmed, and filled with a terrifying, piercing intelligence. And they were looking directly at the log, directly at the lens, directly at me. The monologue was over. The interaction had begun. That single snapped twig echoed in my mind like a thunderclap. For what felt like an eternity, time suspended. The creature was staring directly at the fallen oak log that shielded me. Its eyes were wide, scanning the brush with a predator's precision, searching for the source of the noise. I stopped breathing. I physically willed my heart to slow down, terrified that the rhythmic thumping in my chest would vibrate through the ground and give me away. This was the moment of the sacrifice. Not a physical offering, but the sacrifice of my peace of mind, my career, and my place in the sane world. As I lay there, pressed into the damp mold of the forest floor, clutching the camera that was still silently recording, the weight of what I possessed crashed down on me. I looked at the tape counter ticking upward in the viewfinder. Down 24, 15, down 24, 16. Every second of footage was a nail in the coffin of my old life. I realized with a sickening clarity that I could never play this for my colleagues at the university. I could never send this to the news. If I released this tape, two things would happen. First, half the world would call me a fraud. They would analyze the pixels, debate the shadows, and call me a liar seeking 15 minutes of fame. I would be ridiculed, stripped of my credentials, and cast out of the scientific community I revered. But the second possibility was far worse. The other half of the world, the half with guns, helicopters, and containment units, would believe me. If I played this audio of a Sasquatch speaking English, thanking its paw, and mourning its freedom, I wouldn't be saving a species. I would be signing its death warrant. The military wouldn't see a person. They would see a biological asset, a linguistic anomaly to be dissected. I was trapped. I was holding the greatest discovery in human history, and I had to bury it to protect the very monster that terrified me. I was sacrificing my legacy to protect a creature that could snap my spine like a dry branch. The isolation was instant and absolute. I was no longer a man of science. I was a vault. The creature, unable to pinpoint me in the dense undergrowth, let out a low, rumbling growl, not of aggression, but of fear. It shifted its weight, grimacing as the trap bit deeper into its leg. It was vulnerable, scared, and talking to the empty woods. Shadows. Watch. Why? Hide? It knew something was there. It was addressing me directly, even if it couldn't see me. The intelligence behind those words cut me deep. It wasn't reacting to instinct, it was using logic. Noise means presence. Silence means hiding. The moral sacrifice was the hardest part. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stand up, to wave my hands, to shout, "I can help you, I can open the trap." I had the tools in my pack. I could free him. But fear, primal, selfish fear, kept me glued to the ground. I sacrificed my humanity, my compassion, for my survival. I watched a sentient being suffer because I was too cowardly to reveal myself, and too greedy to stop recording. I was stealing its pain for my archives. I felt a wave of self-loathing so potent it nearly made me retch. I was the man it spoke of. I was the cold observer. I was the one watching from the dark. The creature slumped back against the rock, its energy fading. The adrenaline of the scare was wearing off, replaced by the dull throb of the injury. It began to hum, a low, melodic, mournful sound that vibrated in my chest. It wasn't a song. It was a soothe. It was comforting itself in the face of the unknown. I lay there for 20 minutes, my muscles cramping, the camera getting heavier by the second. I was alone in the universe. Just me, the tape, and the impossible truth. I knew then that if I made it out of these woods, I would never be normal again. I would carry this secret like a cancer. The silence of the forest wasn't peaceful anymore. It was a conspiracy. And I was now a co-conspirator. The humming continued. It was a sound that vibrated not just in the air, but in the marrow of my bones. A low polyphonic thrumming that sounded like a cello being played inside a cavern. It wasn't a mindless groan of pain. It was a melody. A slow, mournful, deliberate sequence of notes that repeated in a complex cycle. I lay there, pressed into the dirt, realizing with a shivering awe that I was listening to a lullaby. The creature trapped and bleeding was singing itself to sleep, or perhaps singing itself to death. This was the beginning of the bond. It wasn't a handshake or a shared meal. It was a forced intimacy, born of my voyeurism and his suffering. Through the lens of the camera, the monster dissolved. The terrifying scale of his shoulders and the primal thickness of his brow faded into the background, replaced by the undeniable humanity of his behavior. He was rocking gently, cradling his injured leg with hands that were surprisingly dexterous. I watched him use a long, thick fingernail to delicately pick a piece of debris out of the wound. He winced, his breath hitching, a reaction so universally relatable that I felt a phantom pain in my own ankle. I had spent my life studying the acoustics of animals. I knew the aggressive bark of a bear, the territorial scream of a cougar. This was neither. This was the behavior of a sentient being trying to manage trauma with dignity. The miracle happened 10 minutes into the recording, a moment that I still replay in my nightmares because of how beautiful it was. A small red squirrel, confused by the strange stillness in the usually noisy valley, skittered down the trunk of the hemlock tree, the very tree the trap was chained to. It moved erratically, twitching its tail, inching closer to the massive, dark shape slumped against the rock. In any other context, this was a prey animal approaching an apex predator. I held my breath, expecting violence. I expected the Sasquatch to lash out, to crush the small thing for a quick burst of protein, or out of the sheer frustration of pain. But he didn't. The creature stopped humming. He slowly turned his massive head, his dark eyes tracking the squirrel's movement. The squirrel froze, sensing the colossal presence. They stared at each other for a long moment. 5 pounds of nervous energy against 800 pounds of trapped power. Then, the Sasquatch spoke. "Little brother." The words were barely a whisper, soft and rumbling. He didn't lunge. He slowly, agonizingly extended one finger, a finger as thick as a flashlight, and touched the moss next to his knee. "Run, iron, hides here." He was warning it. He was protecting the squirrel from the trap. My heart shattered. The scientific detachment I had been clinging to like a life raft disintegrated completely. This wasn't just intelligence. This was altruism. This was empathy. In the midst of his own torture, trapped by a device made by humans, he was showing mercy to a lesser creature. He understood that the iron was a threat to all living things, and he chose to be a guardian rather than a killer. The squirrel, seemingly understanding the tone if not the words, chattered once and darted back up the tree. The Sasquatch watched it go, a look of profound ancient sadness settling over his face. He looked at his own trapped leg, then back at the tree, and whispered one more word: "Free." I realized then that I was the monster in this scenario. I was the representative of the species that forged the steel, set the trap, and was now hiding in the bushes, stealing his dignity on magnetic tape. A powerful, overwhelming urge to act surged through me. I looked at my pack. I had a multi-tool. I had a heavy pry bar I used for leverage on rock faces. I could do it. I could stand up, walk down there, and try to pry the jaws of the trap open. It was a moment of pure, crystalline connection. I felt, telepathically or just through raw emotion, his resignation. He had accepted his fate. He was waiting for the cold or the hunter to finish him. I wanted to be his savior. I imagined the scene. The terrified trust, the metal springing open, the giant nodding to me before vanishing into the mist. It was a fantasy of redemption. I shifted my knees, preparing to rise. I was going to do it. I was going to reveal myself. I was going to cross the 40 yards of separation and bridge the gap between man and myth. I moved my hand from the camera to the ground to push myself up. But as I moved, the sun shifted. A shaft of light pierced through the canopy, illuminating the ravine floor. It hit the lens of my camcorder. A flared reflection, a brief flash of glass and light, bounced off the lens and struck the mossy rock right next to the creature's head. It was a tiny thing. A flicker, but to a creature that had survived for decades by being invisible, it was a beacon. The bond was severed instantly. The creature didn't look at the rock where the light had hit. He traced the angle of the reflection. He looked back up the slope. He looked past the fallen oak. He looked through the rhododendrons. He stopped humming. The silence that followed was heavier than the mountain itself. He wasn't looking at a squirrel anymore. He wasn't looking at the trap. He was looking at the anomaly in his world. He was looking at the lens. The miracle was over. The miracle was that he hadn't killed me yet. And as I saw his posture shift from resigned victim to cornered beast, I knew that my moment of hesitation had cost me the chance to be a savior. Now, I was just a witness to a tragedy that was about to turn violent. The transition from little brother to intruder took less than a second, and the look in his eyes changed from sorrow to a cold, terrifying recognition. Mark just missed his chance to save him. Now the creature sees him. What happens next? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the terrifying stories about a Bigfoots. Perfeito. O capítulo 5 e a CTA 2 estão aprovados. Chegamos ao momento mais tenso e aterrorizante da história. Vamos para o capítulo 6, o clímax. Neste capítulo, a observação passiva termina. O Bigfoot percebe Mark e a fita proibida captura a interação direta entre homem e monstro. A tensão explode. Vou manter a densidade narrativa e o foco no terror psicológico e físico para atingir a meta de palavras. Etapa 2. Roteirização. Capítulo 6. The Climax. Capítulo 6. The Climax. The Red Light and the Verdict. The silence that followed the flash of light on the lens wasn't empty. It was heavy, pressurized, like the air before a tornado touches down. I was frozen behind the fallen oak, my eye still glued to the viewfinder, my finger locked on the camera body. Logic screamed at me to duck, to run, to hide. But the hypnotism of the moment pinned me to the earth. I was watching a god realize it was being watched by an insect. In the grainy black and white display, I saw the transformation happen in real time. The creature's posture shifted instantly. The slump of the wounded victim vanished, replaced by the rigid, coiled tension of an apex predator. His head was cocked, his nostrils flaring wide, inhaling the air in sharp, rhythmic bursts. He was triangulating me. He smelled the fear sweat. He smelled the electronics. He smelled the betrayal. He didn't roar. A bear would have roared. A mountain lion would have screamed. This creature did something infinitely worse. He leaned forward, staring directly into the barrel of my lens, and narrowed his eyes. It was a look of profound, crushing disappointment mingled with a cold, incandescent rage. He knew exactly what the camera was. Or if he didn't understand the technology, he understood the intent. Observation without permission. The humming stopped. The woods were dead silent. And then, for the first time, he spoke directly to me. Not to the air, not to the squirrel, but to the lens. Watcher. The word hit me like a physical blow. It was a label, an accusation. The voice was louder now, projecting from the diaphragm with a power that vibrated the leaves around me. You. Steel. Shadow. My blood ran cold. Steel shadow. Was that how they understood photography? As a theft of the soul? The philosophical implication was terrifying, but the reality was immediate. He knew I was there. The illusion of my invisibility was shattered. I began to scramble backward, my boots slipping on the wet mulch. The noise of my movement was the final trigger. The creature didn't lunge. The trap still held him, but he moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something of that size. He grabbed the heavy iron chain binding his leg to the hemlock tree. I watched, terrified, as he pulled. He didn't jerk it frantically. He planted his massive feet, gripped the chain with both hands, and heaved. The sound was sickening. The groan of the ancient hemlock roots tearing through the soil, the screech of metal links under impossible tension. He wasn't trying to break the trap. He was trying to uproot the tree. Coward, he bellowed. The word was clear, unmistakable. It wasn't broken English anymore. It was a judgment. To be called a coward by a beast trapped in iron. It broke something in my mind. I stood up. I don't know why. Maybe it was panic. Maybe it was a suicidal urge to defend myself. I stood up behind the log, revealing myself fully. I was holding the camera like a shield, the red wreck light glowing steady in the gloom. The creature stopped pulling. He stood to his full height. Even on one damaged leg, he was colossal, a dark tower of fur and muscle blocking out the sun. He looked at me, then at the camera. His expression wasn't animalistic rage. It was human hatred. Pure, intelligent hatred. He pointed a finger at me, a gesture so human it made me nauseous. Fire waits for you. It was a curse, a prophecy, and then he did the unthinkable. He stopped pulling at the tree. He looked down at the trap, then at a massive, jagged rock within his reach. He didn't use the rock on the trap. He picked it up, a boulder the size of a microwave, and looked at me. I turned to run just as his arm snapped forward. The sound of the rock moving through the air was a whoosh, followed instantly by an explosion of wood. The boulder smashed into the oak log I had been hiding behind a split second earlier, obliterating the bark and sending splinters shrapneling into the air. If I had stayed prone, I would have been paced. The impact knocked me off my feet. I scrambled up, the camera dangling by its strap, banging against my ribs. I didn't look back. I ran. I abandoned the expensive Nagra recorder in the blind. I abandoned my parabolic mic. I ran with the blind panic of a prey animal, crashing through rhododendrons, tearing my clothes, sliding down embankments. Behind me, the sounds were the stuff of nightmares. It wasn't just roaring. It was the sound of the forest being dismantled. I heard trees snapping. I heard the metallic clang of the chain being thrashed against stone. And underneath it all, I heard him screaming after me. Not inarticulate noise, but words. "Come back! Fix! Fix!" He was demanding I fix what my kind had done. He was demanding I release him. But I ran. I ran until my lungs burned like acid. I ran until the sounds of his rage faded into the distance, replaced by the blood rushing in my ears. I made it to my truck, threw the camera on the passenger seat, and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I dropped them twice. As I finally turned the ignition and the engine roared to life, I looked at the camera one last time. The red light was still on, it was still recording. I had the footage, I had the audio, I had the proof, but as I peeled out onto the logging road, leaving a cloud of dust between me and the throat, I realized I had left something else back there. I had left my humanity. I had been given a direct order by a dying sentient being, fix, and I had chosen to run. The creature wasn't the monster. The monster was the man driving the Ford truck, speeding away with a stolen soul on a magnetic tape. The drive back to civilization was a blur of adrenaline and dissociation. I don't remember the logging roads. I don't remember the highway. I only remember the white-knuckle grip on the steering wheel and the phantom sound of that word, coward, bouncing around the cab of my truck like a trapped bird. I checked the rearview mirror every 30 seconds, half expecting to see a massive dark shape keeping pace with the vehicle, loping effortlessly alongside me to exact its vengeance, but there was only dust and the empty, indifferent road. When I finally reached my small rental cabin on the outskirts of Asheville, I didn't just lock the door, I barricaded it. I pushed the heavy oak dresser against the frame. I drew every blind. I turned off every light. I sat in the darkness for an hour, clutching the camcorder, terrified that the sheer radioactive nature of the evidence inside would somehow signal the authorities. Finally, the scientist in me, or what was left of him, took over. I needed to know what I had. I connected the camera to my small television with shaking hands. I sat on the floor, took a breath that tasted like bile, and pressed play. Viewing the footage in the safety of a human room didn't make it less terrifying. It made it more real. On the grainy screen, the scene played out with a clinical, undeniable clarity. The audio was rough, but the voice, God, the voice. Through the television speakers, the low-frequency rumble of his speech rattled the windows. I transcribed every word. Iron bites deep. Why hate? Pa told Watch. Little brother. Watcher. You steal shadow. Fix. I watched the moment of the confrontation 100 times. I paused the tape on his face. That split second where he looked into the lens. It wasn't a blurry monster photo. It was a portrait of a person. I could see the intricate map of wrinkles around his eyes. I could see the wetness of his tears. I could see the intelligence burning with a fire that no animal possesses. That night, the transformation happened. The Mark who woke up that morning, the ambitious acoustician, the nature lover, the man who believed in the categorization of species, died in that cabin. He was replaced by a man burdened with a truth too heavy for one spine to carry. I realized the paradox of my situation. I held the proof that the world had been demanding for a century. I could walk into the Smithsonian tomorrow. I could be famous. I could be rich. But then I heard his voice again. Men leave iron. If I released this tape, I would be proving him right. I would be bringing the ultimate iron to his doorstep. The valley would be swarmed. The military would firebomb the canopy to flush them out. They would be hunted, tranquilized, caged, and dissected. The Pa he spoke of. The brothers. They would all be destroyed because of my vanity. I made a decision that was professional suicide. I took my field notes, 3 years of acoustic research, maps of the throat, detailed logs of migration patterns, and I threw them into the fireplace. I watched the paper curl and blacken, turning my career into ash. I erased the Nagra tapes that contained the ambient location data. I scrubbed my existence from the scientific record. I became a ghost. I moved 3 times in the first year. I changed my name. I took jobs that required no questions: night security, janitorial work, anything to stay invisible. I kept the tape, the original mini DV cassette, in a fireproof, waterproof lockbox buried under the floorboards of wherever I lived. I didn't keep it as a trophy. I kept it as a penance. I kept it because he told me to fix, and I couldn't fix his leg, and I couldn't free him from the trap. The only thing I could fix was the silence. By keeping the secret, I was keeping his family safe from the men. It was a twisted form of loyalty to the creature I had abandoned. But the transformation wasn't just social, it was psychological. I can no longer walk in the woods. The sound of wind in the trees triggers panic attacks. The sight of a squirrel makes me weep. I live in concrete cities now, where the noise is mechanical and safe. I am haunted by the knowledge that there is a parallel civilization out there, hiding in the margins, judging us, fearing us, and, in that one terrible instance, begging us for mercy. I am an old man now. The fire he predicted waits for me. I feel it in my chest, a sickness that the doctors can't quite diagnose. I know my time is running out, and that is why I am speaking now. Not to the government, not to the press, but to you. I need to pass this burden on. I need someone else to know that we are not the only ones speaking in the dark. The tape is real. The words were English, and the verdict he passed on us, coward, was the truest thing ever spoken in the history of mankind. They say that sound waves never truly disappear. They just dissipate, growing fainter until they are part of the background static of the universe. But his voice hasn't faded. It echoes in my quiet apartment. It echoes in my dreams. Why hate? I often wonder what happened after I drove away. Did he pull the tree down? Did the cold finally take him? Or did his brothers come? Did they find him shackled by our iron, confirming every dark story they tell their children about the men who live in the light? I will never know. I ran away from the answer. But I leave you with this warning. When you go into the woods, when you seek the silence of nature, be careful what you wish for. You might think you are listening for birds or wind or peace. But if you listen closely enough, past the noise of your own arrogance, you might hear the trees speaking back. And they are not praying. They are judging. Some secrets aren't meant to be found. They are meant to be heard, respected, and left in the dark. I possess the proof, but he possessed the humanity. And in the end, that is the only discovery that matters. The tape remains locked away. Do you think Mark should destroy it or release it to the world? Tell us your verdict in the comments. Subscribe for more forbidden files.